Most nights, the Sterling Global headquarters in downtown Chicago looked like a glass giant rising out of the cold Midwest wind. Bright, polished, intimidating. But once the last executive went home, the building changed personalities. The laughter in the hallways disappeared. The conference rooms turned silent. And that was when Caleb Bennett began his shift. Caleb pushed his cleaning cart down the 12th floor hallway, the wheels squeaking softly on the glossy marble. He moved with the quiet rhythm of someone who'd done this job long enough to know every smudge on every window. His shoulders were broad from years of physical work, his hands rough, but his face carried a kind of gentle tiredness, common among single dads who held the whole world together with duct tape and hope. To most people in the building, he wasn't Caleb. He was just the custodian, the guy you smile politely at, then forget 2 seconds later. Invisible. Background. And honestly, on most days, Caleb didn't mind being invisible. It gave him space to breathe, to think, to survive. But tonight, invisible hurt a little more than usual. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from the hospital. Lily's asthma is worsening. Please bring her in for evaluation if symptoms don't improve. He closed his eyes for a second. His daughter was only 7, small for her age, with warm eyes and a laugh that could soften concrete. But her lungs were fragile, and the new medication cost more than Caleb made in an entire week. He tucked the phone away and kept working. One more conference room, one more trash can, one more night trying to stretch $20 across 7 days. As he wiped down a long glass table, he caught a glimpse of himself in the reflection. Dark hoodie under his uniform shirt, tired eyes, jaw clenched. He looked like a man carrying too much and pretending it was fine. From down the hallway, he heard the muffled voices of executives still arguing in the boardroom. Unusual for midnight. Their tone was urgent, irritated, desperate. Caleb paused. He had cleaned this building for 6 years, and he knew one thing for sure. Executives only stayed this late when something was seriously wrong. He didn't know it yet, but in less than 48 hours, this invisible man would walk into the same room and change everything. The voices from the boardroom grew sharper, tight, stressed, the kind of tension that only came when big money was on the line. Caleb slowed his steps, pretending to adjust the mop handle, but really just listening. Years of working nights had sharpened his senses. He could tell a lot about a situation by the sound of people's voices. Tonight sounded bad. When he pushed open the boardroom door to empty the trash, the room was glowing under the harsh LED lights. Suits were scattered across the table, laptops open, coffee cups abandoned, like soldiers falling in battle. At the head of the table stood Julia Sterling, the CEO, her expression sharp enough to cut glass. She wasn't the kind of leader people ignored. She was the kind people feared. Caleb kept his eyes down, professional, quiet, the way custodians were expected to be. "We have 48 hours, Julia said, her voice steady but loaded with pressure. "If we don't deliver an accurate translation of that contract, we lose the entire deal." The room went still. "$1 million deal," someone whispered. "Correction," Julia snapped. "A deal worth hundreds of millions. And the board has approved an emergency reward, $1 million cash, to whoever can translate the entire document precisely before the deadline." Even Caleb froze at that. $1 million. To him, that number was unreal, absurdly huge, like something you only heard on game shows or in late-night commercials. $1 million meant Lily's asthma treatment, his mother's surgery, a home without eviction notices taped to the door, a life without constant fear. As Caleb lifted the trash bag, a stack of papers caught his eye on the corner of the table. Dense, complicated pages covered in tight French legal terminology. Something inside him stirred, not greed, recognition. He knew this language. He grew up hearing his father speak it, teach it, live in it. He walked out of the boardroom without a word, but his heartbeat had changed. For the first time in years, Caleb didn't feel invisible. He felt called. When Caleb returned to the supply closet, he shut the door quietly and leaned against it, trying to steady the rush in his chest. The idea of $1 million sounded unreal, but the French words on those papers kept echoing in his mind like an old melody he hadn't heard in years. It wasn't just a language, it was a memory. His father, Thomas Bennett, used to sit at the kitchen table every evening, a warm lamp glowing beside a plate of leftovers, teaching Caleb phrases in French, Spanish, and Arabic. His voice was soft, patient, melodic, nothing like the cold corporate voices echoing through Sterling Global. Thomas believed languages were bridges between worlds, and he taught his son as if passing down a sacred heirloom. But life didn't treat his father kindly. Thomas had worked for an international textile firm until layoffs hit like a storm. The stress, the debt, the long nights. Caleb remembered it all. His father's heart gave out before he ever got another chance. At 17, Caleb shelved his dreams and picked up 2 jobs, promising himself that one day, somehow, he would rise again. Now, standing in that supply closet under buzzing fluorescent lights, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in years. Possibility. A quiet spark under the weight of exhaustion. He opened his locker and pulled out a small notebook. His father's old vocabulary journal. The edges were worn, the pages yellowed, but the notes inside were sharp, methodical, alive. Caleb flipped through them with steady hands. Could he actually do this? Should he even try? $1 million could change everything. Lily's medicine, his mother's surgery, their entire life. But stepping into that arena meant risking everything too. A custodian aiming for $1 million reward? People would laugh. Or worse, accuse him of stealing corporate documents. Still, he couldn't ignore the weight in his chest. The feeling that fate had pushed this file into the path of the one man who could read it. Caleb took a slow breath, clutching the notebook. For the first time in a long time, hope felt real and dangerously close. By the time Caleb stepped outside into the chilly Chicago air, the night felt heavier than usual. Thick, restless, almost electric. He pulled his hoodie tighter around his neck and hurried toward the aging apartment building where he and his family lived. The elevators had been broken for months, so he climbed the dim stairwell to the 3rd floor, each step echoing like a reminder of how hard life had gotten. His mother was sitting on the couch when he walked in, wrapped in a faded blanket, her breathing slow and labored. Mrs. Bennett tried to smile, but even her smile looked tired. "You're late, baby," she whispered. "Just a long shift," Caleb said, kissing her forehead. He didn't tell her about the crisis at work. She had enough to worry about. His daughter, Lily, was curled up asleep on the second-hand recliner, her small chest rising and falling with that fragile, wheezy rhythm he hated hearing. The doctor had warned him her asthma was getting more aggressive. She needed a specialist, better medication, maybe even temporary relocation to a cleaner environment. All things Caleb couldn't afford. A pile of unopened envelopes sat on the counter. He already knew what they were: hospital bills, insurance denials, an eviction warning printed in cold, sharp letters. He opened one anyway. Final notice: rent past due. Property will be reclaimed in 14 days. The words burned like acid. His stomach twisted with a deep, familiar ache. The kind of fear that came from knowing you were running out of time, options, and excuses. It was the same feeling he had after his father died, the same suffocating helplessness. But tonight, something was different. There was a crack in the wall, a sliver of opportunity, $1 million chance. Caleb went into the kitchen, pulled out his father's notebook, and set it on the table beside the bills. The contrast was painful but electric. 2 futures staring at each other across a cheap wooden surface. He looked at Lily sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm around her. He looked at his mother, fighting through every breath. And he knew. Trying wasn't optional anymore. It was survival. The next morning, after barely 3 hours of restless sleep, Caleb woke to the sharp knock of reality. Literally. Someone was banging on his apartment door with the kind of impatient rhythm that never brought good news. When he opened it, the building manager stood there holding a yellow envelope, his expression stiff and uncomfortable. "Caleb, I'm sorry, man, but this is the final notice." Caleb took the envelope with a steady hand, but inside his stomach dropped. The manager lowered his voice. "You've got 2 weeks. After that, I don't have a choice." When the door shut, the small apartment suddenly felt smaller, tighter, heavier, almost suffocating. Sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, catching on the worn carpet and stacks of medical paperwork piled across the kitchen counter like an overwhelming maze. His mother sat at the table, bundled in her soft gray sweater, sipping weak tea. Her eyes, gentle but exhausted, followed him carefully. "Another one?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Lily shuffled out of her bedroom, rubbing her eyes, her hair messy, her breathing quick and wheezy. Caleb immediately knelt to check her inhaler. She smiled anyway. Kids had a way of finding light in places adults could no longer see. "Daddy, can we go to the park today?" she asked with hopeful brightness. His heart twisted. He wished he could say yes. Instead, he smoothed her hair and whispered, "Maybe soon, sweetheart." When she went to draw pictures at the table, Caleb opened the envelope. "Past due rent, final warning, eviction scheduled." The words felt cold, blunt, merciless. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from pressure. From the crushing weight of being the only line of defense for the two people he loved most in the world. He looked around the cramped apartment. The peeling paint, the ancient appliances, the little drawings Lily taped proudly to the refrigerator, and something inside him tightened with quiet determination. He didn't have room for doubt anymore. Not with $1 million sitting inside that building downtown. Not with 2 lives depending on him. Caleb took a long breath. The clock had officially started. That night, after dinner plates were washed and Lily finally fell asleep on the couch with her favorite blanket, Caleb sat alone at the kitchen table. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that made every problem feel louder. In front of him lay 2 things, a stack of unpaid bills and his father's old vocabulary notebook. One represented the life that was crushing him. The other represented the life he once dreamed of. Caleb opened the notebook, running his fingers over the faded handwriting. His father's notes were sharp, precise, almost elegant, filled with careful definitions and examples written in a calm, scholarly style. Reading them now felt like hearing his father's voice again. Warm, steady, encouraging. "You can build a future with your words, son," Thomas Bennett had always said. "You just have to be brave enough to use them." Those words hit different tonight. $1 million wasn't just a number anymore. It was a doorway. Caleb grabbed his phone, zoomed in on the blurry picture he had taken earlier of the French contract lying on the conference table at work. Paragraph after paragraph of dense legal phrases stared back at him. Complicated, intimidating, but strangely familiar. He translated one sentence in his mind, then another, then another. It came to him as naturally as breathing. His pulse quickened, not from fear, but from recognition. He could do this, not as a custodian, not as someone invisible, but as a man who knew this language deeply, intimately, the way a musician knows a song by heart. At 11:42 p.m., Caleb made his first move. He wrote out a clean, accurate translation of one complex section, just a small part, and slipped it into his backpack. Tomorrow during his shift, he would quietly leave it on the conference room whiteboard. Not enough to get caught, not enough to be noticed, just enough to test the waters. Enough to let the world know a ghost was out there. A ghost who knew French better than anyone in that entire building. "Night whisper," he murmured to himself with a wry smile. A secret identity, a lifeline, a first step toward $1 million. The next evening, Sterling Global buzzed with an unusual kind of energy, sharp, restless, almost electric. When Caleb walked into the 12th floor conference room to empty the trash, he immediately sensed something was different. Executives hovered around the whiteboard like anxious detectives, pointing, whispering, analyzing. And there it was, his handwriting, his carefully translated paragraph, signed with nothing but 2 small letters. N.W. Night Whisper, his anonymous first step. Caleb kept his head down, playing the role he knew too well, the quiet custodian who slipped in and out of rooms like a shadow. But inside, his heartbeat thudded with cautious hope. Then he heard it, the voice that made that hope falter. Marcus Hale, the ambitious vice president, with a polished smile and a reputation as slick as his tailored suits, strutted toward the boardroom like he owned the building. Julia Sterling stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes narrowed in thought. "I figured it out," Marcus announced, tapping the translation with his expensive pen. "I wrote this last night. Just didn't want to brag until I was sure." Caleb froze mid-step. Several executives murmured in admiration. Julia's expression softened slightly. Relieved, impressed, maybe even hopeful. "That's extraordinary, Marcus," she said. "If you can handle this level of complexity, we may have a chance after all." Marcus flashed a charming, confident grin. "Happy to step up for the company." Caleb's stomach knotted, a cold, sinking feeling tightening in his chest. He had lived this moment before. The wrong person taking credit for the right work. His father had experienced it too many times. Now it was happening again, right in front of him. But this time, the stakes weren't small. This time, the prize was $1 million. $1 million Marcus now believed he deserved. Caleb backed out of the conference room quietly, gripping his trash bag until the plastic stretched and strained. He didn't say a word. Not yet. But the fire building inside him, that was new. Night Whisper wasn't going to be stolen so easily. For the next 2 nights, Caleb continued his quiet routine, slipping in and out of empty offices with his cleaning cart while secretly reviewing sections of the French contract during breaks. Every sentence he translated felt like one more step towards saving his family, one more breath of hope. But something in the building had changed. The air felt tighter. The halls felt watched. By the 3rd night, the tension was unmistakable. Security cameras that Caleb had barely noticed for years were suddenly angled differently, tilted lower, aimed right at the conference room door. 2 extra security guards paced the hallway with stiff, uneasy expressions. Even the executives walked like they were stepping on eggshells. Then Caleb heard Marcus's voice drifting through the hallway, a smooth, calculated tone with an edge of frustration underneath. "We have a leak," Marcus said. "Someone is sneaking into this room after hours. Whoever this Night Whisper is, they're hiding something. Find them." The words hit Caleb like a punch. He froze behind his cart, listening as the security chief replied with a serious, almost growling voice. "We're here reviewing all after-hours access, footage, badge swipes, locker contents. Everyone's a suspect." Caleb's heart hammered painfully. He tightened his grip on his mop handle, forcing his breathing to stay quiet, steady, invisible. But inside, panic flared hot and sharp. If they tied any of the translations back to him, if they found the photos on his phone, if they discovered he had touched those documents at all, a custodian reading confidential files, they wouldn't just fire him, they could ruin his life. And Marcus wasn't just hungry for credit, he was hungry for control. As Caleb stepped into an empty hallway, his pulse thudding like a drum, he realized the truth. Helping the company had turned into a dangerous game. One wrong move, and he wouldn't just lose the $1 million. He'd lose his job, his home, maybe even custody of Lily. But deep inside, beneath the fear and exhaustion, one thought refused to die. He couldn't stop now, not when his family's future depended on it. The next night, Caleb arrived to work early, hoping the quiet would calm his nerves. Instead, the building felt sharper than ever. Brighter lights, colder air, a kind of tense corporate buzz that made the hair on his arms stand up. When he reached the locker room, his heart sank. His locker was wide open, ransacked. Items pushed around carelessly like someone had been digging for secrets. On the metal bench sat his father's fountain pen, the one Caleb always kept tucked in a small pouch, the only physical piece of his father he had left. Now it lay exposed, almost staged, as if it were a clue. And standing behind it, twirling the pen between his fingers with a smug, satisfied smirk, was Marcus Hale. "Interesting item for a custodian," Marcus said, his voice slick and condescending. "French-made, elegant, expensive, almost like something a translator might own." Caleb felt his chest tighten with a sharp, protective anger. "That's mine," he said quietly. "Give it back." Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice into a cold whisper. "You know what's funny? Security is convinced this Night Whisper person might be stealing confidential documents. That's a serious breach, a career-ending breach." He clicked the pen shut with a soft, ominous snap. "Now imagine if you were tied to it." Caleb's stomach twisted. Marcus leaned in, his eyes gleaming with calculated arrogance. "So let's make this simple. You stay out of my way, and I don't destroy your life. I can make one phone call and have child services questioning your ability to provide for your daughter, or your mother's medical coverage could suddenly disappear." His words were icy, sharp, merciless. Caleb swallowed hard, not out of fear, but fury, controlled, burning fury. Marcus wasn't protecting the company. He was protecting himself, protecting the $1 million he believed he deserved. Caleb slowly picked up the pen when Marcus finally let it fall into his hand. He walked away without a word, but inside a storm was rising. One more powerful than fear, one fueled by every injustice he and his father had ever endured. Night Whisper wasn't done, not by a long shot. The next day felt heavier than the last. The sky above Chicago was a dull, bruised gray, the kind of weather that matched the weight sitting on Caleb's chest. He spent the morning at the hospital with Lily, watching her struggle through another breathing test. The doctor's expression was gentle but worried. "She needs stronger medication," she said softly. "And soon. Her lungs are working too hard." Caleb nodded, even though he already knew the answer to the question he didn't want to ask. "How much is it?" The doctor hesitated before giving the number. A number Caleb could never afford. Not now. Not with eviction notices waiting at home. When they returned to the apartment, Caleb tucked Lily into bed before his shift. He kissed her forehead, watching her sleep, her breathing shallow, her small body curled up like she was trying to make herself invisible. Invisible, just like him, but not tonight. At work, he slipped into the same supply closet where he had first felt hope. He opened his father's notebook and compared it to the latest section of the French contract he had photographed earlier. What he read made his blood run cold. Hidden deep inside the legal language was a clause requiring the termination of over 500 American workers within 3 months. Workers with families. Workers who depended on their paychecks just like he did. And Marcus's translation had twisted the clause to look harmless. More than harmless. Beneficial. Caleb stared at the page, his pulse pounding in his ears. He thought of his father, the brilliant man who had been discarded. He thought of the workers who would suffer the same fate. He thought of his mother, his daughter, his own barely hanging on life. This wasn't just about the $1 million anymore. This was about justice. This was about stopping a greedy man from destroying hundreds of lives. But stepping forward meant risking everything. His job, his family's safety, even his freedom. Caleb closed the notebook slowly. He knew what he had to do, even if it terrified him. Night Whisper wasn't just a ghost anymore. He was the only one who could stop this. The next morning, Sterling Global looked different. Not in the lights or the marble floors, but in the atmosphere, charged, impatient, humming with executive ego. The company was preparing for a high-stakes meeting with the Paris partners, and everyone moved with frantic purpose. Everyone except Caleb. He walked through the building slowly, deliberately, his cleaning cart rolling beside him like a familiar shield. But inside, something was shifting, steady, brave, unshakable. He wasn't just a custodian tonight. He was a man about to tell the truth. When he reached the 12th floor boardroom, the door was already open. Julia Sterling stood at the head of the long glass table, polished and powerful in her navy suit. Marcus Hale hovered beside her, wearing that smug $1 million smile he'd perfected. Executives filled the room, murmuring anxiously. Caleb stepped inside. Conversations died instantly. He didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. Marcus lifted an eyebrow, amused and annoyed. "Custodian access is down the hall," he said sharply. Caleb didn't move. Instead, he placed his father's notebook on the center of the table. The room went still. Julia frowned, confused, as Caleb spoke for the first time. His voice low, steady, unexpectedly strong. "Ma'am, before you sign anything today, you need to know that the translation you're using is wrong, dangerous, and intentionally misleading." A ripple of shock moved across the room. Marcus laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "Are you kidding me? This is ridiculous." Caleb cut him off. He flipped open the contract pages he had rewritten by hand. Clean, precise lines of French and English displayed side by side. "In Section 14, Subclause 9, Caleb said, "the original document doesn't authorize workforce streamlining. It mandates the elimination of 500 American jobs." Marcus changed the wording so it wouldn't be caught. The room erupted, gas, whispers, tension thick enough to grab. Julia stepped closer, eyes locked on the translations. "Is this accurate?" she demanded. Caleb met her gaze without flinching. "Yes, ma'am, every word." For the first time in years, he wasn't invisible. He was undeniable. For a long moment, the boardroom was silent, charged, frozen, electric. Julia Sterling stared at the pages Caleb had laid before her, her sharp eyes scanning every line of French and every precise English translation beneath it. She wasn't easily impressed, but something in her expression shifted. Curiosity tangled with disbelief. Marcus broke first. "This is absurd," he snapped, stepping forward. "He's a custodian. He doesn't know what he's talking about." Julia raised a hand, silencing him instantly. Her tone cut through the room like a cold blade. "Marcus, your translation said workforce alignment. His says mandatory termination. Those words are not the same." Caleb's pulse hammered, but he didn't look away. Julia turned to the legal advisor. Verify this, now. The advisor skimmed the French quickly, his face draining of color. She's right, he stammered. Caleb's translation is the accurate one. The room erupted, executives whispering angrily, some furious, some horrified. Marcus's confident grin collapsed into panic. Julia stepped toward him, her voice icy. Did you alter this translation? Marcus sputtered, reaching for excuses. I I was under pressure. I was trying to protect the company. You were trying to protect yourself, Julia interrupted. And you almost cost this company a multi-million-dollar implosion. She turned to security. Escort him out, effective immediately. As Marcus was dragged from the room, his frantic protests echoing in the hall, Caleb felt an unexpected wave of relief rush through him. Light, warm, freeing. Then Julia faced him. But her voice wasn't sharp now. It was steady, almost respectful. Mr. Bennett, she said, you didn't just correct a translation. You saved 500 American families from losing their income. And you saved Sterling Global from signing a catastrophic contract. She exhaled slowly, studying him as though seeing him for the very first time. We owe you more than gratitude. She stepped closer, lowering her tone. I'm honoring the full $1 million reward. And if you're willing, I want you on our international relations team. Officially. Caleb blinked, stunned. The words felt surreal, soft, impossible, world-shifting. $1 million, a real job, a future. His father's notebook trembled slightly in his hands. For the first time in his life, he felt seen, truly seen. The sun had barely risen over Chicago when Caleb stepped out of Sterling Global the next morning, clutching the official contract that confirmed everything. $1 million. A real position. A future he once believed was impossible. The cold morning air felt different. Crisp, clean, almost sweet. For years, this city had pressed down on him like a weight he couldn't escape. But today, the sidewalks felt wider. The sky looked brighter. Even the hum of traffic sounded like quiet applause. When he reached his apartment, Lily was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her crayons, drawing another one of her imaginative, colorful worlds. She turned when she heard him. Daddy, you're home early. Caleb knelt, pulling her into a long, warm hug. For a moment, he couldn't speak. His chest felt full, aching in the best possible way. Lily pulled back, confused by the tears in his eyes. Daddy, what's wrong? Nothing, sweetheart, he whispered. Absolutely nothing. Everything's going to be okay. His mother sat up from the couch, her soft eyes widening as she saw the envelope in his hand. Caleb, is that? He nodded. Then he opened it and laid the check on the table. Her breath caught. Lily gasped. And for the first time in a long, painful stretch of years, the apartment felt filled with hope instead of fear. The next few weeks passed like a gentle transformation. His mother received the surgery she had needed for so long. Lily began treatment with a specialist who finally understood her condition. Eviction notices stopped coming. The refrigerator stayed full. Their home felt warmer, calmer, safer, like life was finally meeting them halfway. At Sterling Global, Caleb walked the halls not as a custodian, but as Director of International Relations, with a badge that carried weight and respect. Employees who once brushed past him now greeted him with warm smiles and genuine admiration. One afternoon, Julia Sterling stopped by his new office, a corner office with a view of the city. She placed a small plaque on his desk. Thank you for speaking up. Caleb smiled quietly. I didn't do it alone, he said, tapping the old fountain pen resting in its new glass stand. My father taught me everything I needed. I just finally used it. Julia nodded, her expression softened. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones nobody sees. Caleb looked out the window at the sprawling city below. The endless grid of streets, the moving cars, the everyday lives unfolding in tiny, invisible stories. He used to be one of them, invisible, silent, unseen. But now he knew the truth. It only takes one moment of courage to rewrite a lifetime. Now let me ask you, the viewer, have you ever felt unnoticed or underestimated? Have you ever had a hidden talent that nobody believed in? If life handed you one chance, just one, would you take it? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if this story touched you, inspired you, or made you feel something real, please subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button. Follow for more emotional, life-changing stories. Because sometimes the invisible become unforgettable.